What's up? You're listening to The Long Game, and I'm your host, David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this Kitchenside episode, we're joined by our podcast producer, Karissa Barcelo, to talk about our learnings over the course of producing 100 podcast episodes and how we became a top podcast on Spotify. We talk about what was most surprising to each of us as we went through the process and our individual styles and how they developed over time. And Karissa shares the various parts of producing a podcast and her learnings there as well. Most importantly, we talk about how getting started is the most important part. So if you're looking to start a podcast or figure out how a podcast can be a part of your marketing strategy, this one's for you. Here's our conversation about what we've learned publishing 100 podcast episodes. Today, let's talk about the fact that we published 100 podcast episodes. And according to our Spotify Wrapped, we're in the top 10% of podcasts on Spotify, which I was personally surprised about. I don't know, Karissa, how did you feel seeing that Spotify Wrapped?
I was like, wow, out of all the podcasts, I mean, that's pretty impressive, I think a lot of it has to do with our consistency. I think a lot of people fall off. They don't continue to publish on a regular basis. So maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know.
I think just continuing on is a huge factor in success with podcasting.
Yeah.
It is with other things too, but you don't ever think about it because nobody ever quits a blog, or maybe they do, but most people don't quit a blog after writing 5 blog posts, whereas a lot of people quit a podcast after doing 5 or 10 episodes.
Yeah. So if you look at the dates and you see, they haven't published since 2020, it's kind of like, it's kind of stale,
That's happened a lot when I've done podcast research. Like I was looking to maybe get on as a guest, and a lot of the podcasts that I looked into had stopped. Like it was probably 50% or more of them.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it's actually one of the more public ways to quit on a project where, I don't know, a blog, I feel like you can go a year not writing and all of a sudden write something and great. But for a podcast, I feel like if you take a year off and all of a sudden start publishing episodes again, it's like, wait, you were gone? What happened in that whole year?
Yeah. I've seen some folks do seasons, but that seems a little bit more intentional. Like they have a season finale and then it's like, okay, break. Whereas some folks just drop off the face of the earth and you're like, oh, where'd they go?
I don't really, do you like seasons? I feel like if it's a narrative show, it makes sense. But I don't like it when marketing shows do seasons.
I think that that's their attempt to give themselves a break. Or if they don't have the runway, they're like, oh, this is the end of season 2. It's like, oh, you just don't have anybody to interview.
Yeah. And I think it's also a misguided belief that people look at them as a media company, which it is a media initiative to do a podcast, but it's to do the whole, I'm waiting with bated breath for the next season thing, which I just don't think for the most part exists in these business type shows.
Mm-mm.
Karissa, you had a background in production, and we figured, oh my God, Chris is perfect to help us get the podcast off the ground and all that.
Yeah.
What were the similarities or differences between your background and helping us start a podcast? Were there any similarities really?
Yes, I think so. Since I was a kid, I always had a passion to put on a show or, okay, we're going live, guys, even if it's from our garage, right? So there's that. I kind of took that, and with my career, I went into television and did some film, and then, wanted to slow down a little bit and have a more steady career, and I wasn't traveling all the time. So that's how I got into marketing, because there is a huge need for content and producing that. One of them happens to be a podcast, and this was just a great way for mass communication, I guess, in the marketing world. We still have an audience we're building, and it just has a similar feeling to producing a show,
What was it like having to listen to all 3 of us so much?
That's a good question.
Producing.
Probably Alex the most.
I get a note of my voice, but you've heard it for so much.
Yeah, no, I loved it because I learned so much. Being, I don't want to say forced, but I had to listen to every episode to make sure, everything sounds good. We cut out what we don't need. And I got to learn so much about each of you, and you each have your own unique styles, your own unique backgrounds. And just the way that you guys interview is just so impressive, and the way that you have these relationships with people and the questions you ask. And then you even take it from professional to personal. You ask about people's passions and hobbies, and all of that stuff was just great. So I probably know a lot more about you guys than you do about me.
Well, that's the interesting part about the podcast format is like you do really get to know somebody and how they think.
Yes.
So I'm curious, would you be able to describe some of the different styles that you've picked up from each of us?
Yeah. So Alex is just very, you love to get into people's mindsets and psychology and understanding them on that level. David, I feel like, is very inquisitive to understand how things operate and work. Like you have a very analytical mind. Yep. Allie is just it's so chill listening to you because you just have a great, comfortable vibe. Like people are just comfortable talking to you, and you're genuinely interested in what they have to say, and that really comes across. So yeah, it's just cool to see the different styles you each have and what you bring to the show.
Have you seen any of our styles evolve or change in any way over time?
I think the skill of interviewing has definitely, you can, like, if we go back and watch the first one, right? I think it was Tommy Walker, and it was like 3 against Tommy Walker, and we learned that
it was David Cadavy.
Oh yeah.
They were like bombarding him with questions.
Yeah. So we learned quickly, like, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's better one-on-one. But overall, I think just the skill that you guys have. I mean, it's interesting because you each have different prep going into this. Alex virtually has no prep. He goes into it and he just goes with the flow, and it turns out great. David takes more time to prep. He has questions, he has notes, and he's really thoughtful about what he's going to ask. And Allie, I think you're a little bit of both, like a mix.
Yeah, I prep like right before, like the hour before. So it's like really fresh, but I don't go in cold because I think it would show. I
want to correct that. I do a ton of research. I just don't do a lot of prep. If that makes sense. That's fair. So like with guests, I listen to every interview that they've done that I can find. And if they've written a book, Mark Schaefer wrote like 6 books. So I didn't read all of his books, but I read one of them. So I do a lot of research because I one of my goals is to make sure that I don't get them to speak on script or give me canned answers. And that requires that I don't give them canned questions. So I really want to make sure that I don't ask them the same things, or if they've said something interesting that a podcast interview didn't pick up on or follow up on in a previous interview, I make sure to ask those questions and dive deeper. Right. So I do a lot of like background research. I usually come with like a 1 page. I just put it in my email because I'm not very organized. Like I'll just have a draft for myself, and it'll cover like topic areas and maybe a couple like prompt questions that are like specifics. You know, if they've tweeted about something, I'll be like, hey, you tweeted about this, because obviously I need to reference that. But once the conversation's going, then I follow it down the path that seems most interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty cool. And you have I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you tell when we know them and when we don't?
Yes, because you'll make mentions of like, oh, you know, so-and-so we met back when, and we had this experience, and then you may talk about that. Whereas if you haven't met them, you're very curious to know all the basics. Like, all right, so tell me about yourselves, you know? So it is clear, but not in a bad way.
What ones are more interesting?
Honestly, either. I don't think there's a huge, preference over either one. What do you guys feel?
Well, I wonder from the listener's perspective, because like if we already know a lot about a person, like we're going to go deeper with them.
Chemistry, yeah.
But I wonder sometimes if we like pass that, like if you just wrote an article about like machine learning and you were an expert and you thought you were speaking to experts, you would like pass over a lot of fundamental things. And I wonder sometimes if like those would be beneficial to the listener to like know some of the more basic foundational details about the person, you know?
Yeah, I do agree.
But I don't know.
I just realized we never actually sat down to learn how we each do our podcast interviews. Like, I think, Karissa, you've probably picked up on how neurotic I get about this stuff. Like, you've seen my documents where
wrong with that.
I have a whole story arc and a plan, and I go in expecting the plan not to work, and it often doesn't. And I'm pivoting the conversation in real time.
I didn't know that. Story arc.
Yeah, I think about the whole arc of, okay, here's how I want to set the foundation of who the person is. here's like the next, like, I want to cover this sort of thing that ties to this thing. And then over time, like they jump around and I'll have to like jump around with them. I find it fun, but it's definitely a very different approach.
Yeah,
I find it interesting how the story arc for me seems to emerge, and I could never have planned what it was going to be up front.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm like the startup metaphor is like you're building the parachute as you're jumping out of the plane, like as you're going down. And I feel like that sometimes, like they'll mention a callback, and I'm like, oh, I can like twist this back in, and by the end, like I've got this bow tie, and I like know the 3 words that are going to summarize the theme of the episode. And it's like I could never have predicted that this was going to be the theme.
Yeah,
kind of cool.
Yeah. I typically like find I take their feedback from the pre-interview like questionnaire, especially the things they want to talk about that aren't related to work, and then I'll see kind of what their other PR is, other interviews, other mentions, things that they've written. It's always nice when they have like their own blog or they're active on social, because you can hear like see their voice and how they talk about things. Mm-hmm. And I'll usually start with a couple threads, and then I'll just lose track of where I am, and I'll just dig into things. Half the time, especially with folks I know like Kayla or Krista, I'll be like, oh shit, we're recording. I like totally forget. I'm like, I should probably make this a little bit more helpful for our listeners. So I'll circle back to like things that pertain to their business or their work, things that they definitely wanted to mention. Some folks want shout outs for like a book or something, which is fine. But my favorite part is the rapid fire at the end, which I've always pulled from your list, Alex. Mm-hmm. Some of it's relevant, but some of it ends up not being, and it's beautiful. Like, what's something you changed your mind about recently is my favorite question, or what's something you believe that most people would disagree with you on. And I usually ask that they answer that question not about work, because everyone has contrarian opinions about work, you know, AI or whatever, but it's just like unrelated to like content or marketing. And it's like Taylor Swift or something completely different.
That twist. That's smart. Yeah.
Yeah. That's fun for me.
Yeah. I like the rapid fire. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Karissa, what was the most difficult part of all of this? Like, I know there's so many moving parts in producing this thing, like making sure we're recording, getting the guest book, having all the information, repurposing. Like, what did you find to be the most difficult part of it?
Most difficult, I'd say it's not necessarily difficult, but just something I have to put more mental load into is just making sure the calendar is updated, and you know, we're repurposing on time, we're getting it to the editor on time, just so that there's no, you know, we're not falling backwards at all. We're just keeping on track with that consistency. That's super important. So it's always like the top of my mind at the beginning of the week. All right, we got this episode going out. Like, let's make sure we have everything we need, you know?
Yeah.
What was the percentage change in difficulty once we doubled the pace of podcasts? Because I assume that you've built up enough efficiencies where it wasn't like a doubling of the difficulty, right, but it had to be a little harder.
It was a little harder, just because things felt like they were going faster. And, you know, one is it's a production, you know, we do have contractors. We have an editor that helps us edit the episode. We have Fiverr freelancers to design the header image, that sort of thing. And then we repurpose it. So that goes on our website, which is great because it has like the key takeaways, which in my opinion is better than reading a transcript. So there's some production that's involved. So when you double that, it just, you know, there's more to think about at the beginning of the week and making sure everything's on track. But it's cool to see. And I can't wait to see what comes of going twice a week versus one time.
What do you think the biggest skill improvements you've experienced are, or like the biggest learnings you've had through this process?
I love to grow like relationships. So I think like helping you guys, like this may not be related to the podcast so much, but office hours, like reaching out and trying to book guests. And it's just been so cool to see how many people are so open to doing this, like being open to doing the podcast, even though we don't have 1 million downloads, you know, no one's really asked that. So it's just been cool to grow in that way, in the sense of like, there is value in what we have. It doesn't have to have fancy metrics or anything. So that was a great learning experience for me, because it kind of makes me feel like anything's possible. And why not reach out to this person who is on our wish list? You know, you never know. So
that's awesome. Yeah, that's a big value add.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we set this context at the beginning of the episode, but tomorrow's your last day with us, which is a very sad day. You're like the first person to join our team like 2 years ago. What are some things you wish you got to do for the podcast that maybe you didn't get a chance to do because you're trying to you're managing everything and building everything from scratch, that you didn't have a chance to like explore new segments or experiment a little?
Yeah. I think I probably would want to take on some interviews myself if I had that bandwidth. Maybe even it would just be so cool to meet up with you guys like in person and maybe do some live recordings. Sometimes I miss that live production, in IRL, in real life. So like, if Alex were to go to a conference, for instance, and there were some people who we were interested in talking to, I'd love to help produce those, even if I'm not in it, but I'm behind the scenes helping him. So I think just trying to take it to the next level, like how can we make this even bigger, and maybe doing some live ones, like we do webinars, but the live podcasts would be cool to experiment with, like getting people to join in live and ask questions. It'd be cool to see what that's like.
We've talked about that before.
We've talked about that a lot before with both the hybrid events as well as like, I think we initially wanted to do most of our podcasts in person. And the only one we ever did, I believe, was PEPs.
PEP. Yep.
Yeah. And that was like kind of in the thick of the pandemic too. It's like, I don't know if it just became like a part of the routine to do them this way, but I know at least my initial idea was to do them in person, to get the body language, to get good video. And I think, that would be really nice. Yeah.
I think it's possible to get there,
We should definitely do those during any offsites where we're all together, at least for kitchen side, because we all know each other so well. Like, I think that's an obvious one.
Well, at least I tell my guests, like, this is just a conversation over a coffee or a drink, and I feel like when you're in person, it's so much easier to actually have that vibe because you're actually like having a drink or a coffee or even a meal with the recording in the background. Whereas when you're remote in front of your computer, the recording is front and center. It's hard to ignore that part.
The pace of the conversation is different too.
Yeah. A lot more like filling in the gaps of the silence and like a lot more bantering, especially as a group. A lot more joking, it feels like.
I wonder if us being on Zoom all the time as a generation of tech employees is going to alter how we actually communicate with others in real life.
I don't know how to talk to
100%. Yeah.
Isn't that sad?
Did you say you don't know how to talk to people?
Yeah, I feel like when I meet up with people in real life, because my job is remote, the bulk of my time is remote, and talking to you guys on Zoom. I mean, I've never even met you guys. Crazy, right?
That is crazy.
Kind of crazy.
You're real humans, So when I go meet up with people, I'm like, wow,
are we
so different?
We're all robots. For me, I'm like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Like Talladega Nights, like.
No, you just gesticulate wildly. Just throw them around like
you don't have a screen. Yeah.
I feel like I do that on podcasts sometimes. Like I'm just like smacking my mic and stuff.
Yeah. Wild.
I know we doubled the production volume, but I guess what does it look like to take a podcast to the next level? In my head, it's like a live talk show. I don't know, a traveling show. We travel to different locations, just interview a bunch of people, or
very cool.
Live events.
That would be really fun. Yeah, I feel like those podcasts, like those rental podcast studios, are becoming more popular, where you still have the same setup, so you can maintain quality.
Oh, do they have that in Austin? They must.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They do.
Yeah, Austin has to be one of the podcast.
It was by the
world.
AppSumo office, wasn't it?
What's that?
There was one by the AppSumo office or something. I remember.
Yeah, I'm sure there's tons of them.
Yeah, there's definitely some here in Chicago. But,
yeah. I think there's. My answer would be like just experimenting with different formats. Like I've noticed that's something that a lot of the big podcasters that I follow do. I know Tim Ferriss has done like all kinds of different format experiments, like reading somebody's book that like just launched a book or something like that, like just a section, or somebody interviewing Tim instead of him interviewing the other person. And I feel like My First Million does a lot of these too. Oddly enough, now that I'm saying it out loud, like I actually don't, I sometimes don't click on the new formats when podcasters, because I'm like, I kind of like just like the regular stuff, but
conversations, yeah.
Yeah, because I've thought about doing different styles, and maybe we will do this eventually, but like monologues,
Yeah, I was
like
gonna
we
say.
write a lot of thought leadership.
Hmm.
Like, what if we just transform that into a script that we read that was like 10 to 20 minutes long, a shorter episode on a specific subject? Like we talked about decentralized content or the barbell strategy as a framework or something like that.
That would be very cool. Because
Q&A.
I would see it and be like, oh, it's 10 minutes on this topic. That's great. I have time for that, and click on
Mhm.
it.
Alex, that podcaster I told you about, the one who writes about, she's like a fiction editor. She did the quiz with the podcast playlist. That's how her podcast is kind of formatted. It's like short lessons. And I think she literally reads her blogs that she wrote. It's not dry. Like she'll add like intonations to it, but it's for her, I think, pretty simplistic. And it's like a one-on-one lesson.
I guess it to me, it has to like the speaker has to like be good at that format. Like I listen to a lot of Sam Harris, not as much anymore, but like I really like his voice, and like he speaks in like clear prose. Like he never says or like or anything.
Yeah.
And he does these sections at the beginning of the podcast called housekeeping. And sometimes his housekeeping is like 10 minutes long, but I want it to be like a whole episode. I just want to hear housekeeping with Sam Harris. Whereas I really don't like those types of podcasts in the marketing space. I really don't like it when somebody just does like a 4-minute or 8-minute lesson. Because for me, it's a very bad format to learn things. Like I would much rather read a blog post or even watch a video if it's like a tutorial. Whereas on podcasts, like maybe this is just personal idiosyncrasies, but I really enjoy something that I don't have to concentrate on for every minute of it. And I can kind of like tune in and out on like a long walk or while I'm doing the dishes or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. That's why conversations feel natural. Like for my audio learning, it's like conversation where folks are just talking through things and bantering a little bit. You learn a lot through it, but you don't have to be like taking notes or like learning the whole time.
Yeah, like I even struggle with certain audiobooks. If it's a comedy audiobook or something like that, it's good. But if it's something that I really have to focus on, I don't get as much value from it. And I usually end up discontinuing those.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Mm-hmm.
What's been the most surprising thing about doing the podcast now that you didn't know going into it 100 episodes ago? Any learnings or anything that, has been...
I feel like I'm a decent interviewer, and that surprised me. Like I never thought I'd be very good at this, except for if it was somebody that I knew. But I've only interviewed, I think, a handful of folks who I didn't know before, but that wasn't too uncomfortable for me.
Great. Do you feel like you've gotten better or more comfortable doing it?
I've gotten better at thinking on the spot is really what it is like coming up with stuff in the moment. Because like we've said, doesn't matter how much you prep or how much you plan, like there will be pivots and you have to kind of think on your feet in a way. Like you're not live in front of an audience, but you are recording and you want it to be natural and smooth. And if it is a stranger, you don't want to give them a bad experience. Right. You want it to be natural and enjoyable. So I think I've gotten better at, I don't know, making stuff.
I think you're very good. So.
Yeah, I thought you were natural. I think that for me, it is the broad applications of the skill set outside of podcasting and the confidence that it gives you. Yeah. So like, even as an extrovert, like I've always been pretty comfortable in social situations, but like I still, in the back of my mind, if I'm talking to somebody new, there's this fear. It's like, what if I don't know what to say next? Like, how is this conversation going to go? Like, I don't know if it's going to go well. And doing so many podcasts with both friends and total strangers, I know in the depths of my heart that the conversation is going to go just fine.
Yes.
And now, no matter who I talk to anywhere in the world, I know that I can carry a great conversation.
That's awesome.
And that is,
that's awesome.
It's this cool confidence that you have. And it opens up so many cool opportunities. Like, you're just like, I'm just going to talk to this person. Like I do it on the airplane all the time now. Like I've made like decent friends on the airplane.
That's cool. Especially in sales.
You're that guy.
Yeah.
It's got to help you. It's got to have helped you in sales too,
100% in sales. Yeah. I mean, dating wise, I haven't been on as many dates, but like it's an incredible skill for dating.
I bet.
You're just interviewing your dates like rapid fire.
You're like, so introduce yourself.
Just grilling them.
When's the last time you changed your mind?
Never.
No, not quite.
What about you, David?
I think kind of two things came to mind. I think growing up, I was that person who I'd take the bus home. I would just talk to a stranger next to me and learn about their life story, and then be like, "Well, guess I'll never see you again." And there was a point where I kind of decided to dial that back because I don't know, it became pretty heavy. I picked up some pretty heavy stories along the way, but it became a common theme across my life where I would ask these questions and people would say, no one's ever asked me that before, or I've never had this type of conversation before. And I always thought that's silly. These are just very obvious questions to ask. And doing a podcast was at scale, like me validating, oh, I'm actually asking pretty good questions. So before it was just one-offs, and now I'm like, oh, I'm getting this feedback almost every interview I've done. So there's something here. So that was a little bit surprising and like something I'm quite proud of now. And then the second thing was I was scared that we would do these interviews and then I would get to know these people and that'd be the end of it. But there's actually been scenarios where like I interviewed the head of growth at Superhuman. He told me he's a huge Nintendo fan. I was in LA. I was catching up with another friend and she said, oh, hey, or he said he's a big fan of Nintendo. My other friend told me Nintendo Land is opening up in Universal Studios. So I was like, oh, I should email Gurov about this Nintendo Land thing in case he doesn't know about it. And like, I'll ping old guests and be like, hey, saw you change jobs, or like, hey, I saw this thing that reminded me of our conversation. So it's been a really cool thing to see that some of them have actually turned into good relationships. Maybe not like best friends, but I've met some of them in person and they're down to meet up. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, I think there is something to say about, you're talking to people sometimes about personal things or, maybe their failures or whatever. There has to be some connection that comes from that. Would you say? I mean, don't they feel closer
really get to know somebody? Yeah. During the podcast. Because you don't have a conversation like that with most of your friends, like you never sit down for an hour and a half and you're just like, let's just do this.
Tell me about your,
I wanted to say to your point, David, your first one, it's like partially the questions you ask, but it's partially the fact that you actually listen. Because I think that's the rare part. Most of the time, like if you can tell when somebody like kind of is half-assing it and like their mind is elsewhere and it feels like shit. And then when somebody's got their full attention and they genuinely care about your answer to the question that you asked, like that is, you feel like $1 million.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Barbara Walters was a great listener, Larry King, they listen so intently. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And David, you do that. Like you've done that forever, like in person on the podcast. That's definitely a good skill.
It's funny that you say that. My parents said that about you at my wedding. They're like, your partner, David, asks the best questions to us. I was like, yeah, he does.
Interesting.
You should feel good about that.
That's cool.
I do. Thank you. I did want to turn a question towards you, Karissa. So there aren't a lot of people who start podcasts or produce them. And we've been fortunate to get your help taking it from 0 to 1 and get it to 100 episodes. And over the course of doing this, I've had multiple people ask about the process and what it's like. And I'm just like, I don't know, Karissa does it. Let me intro you. And then they'll never follow up. So I never made any intros. But everyone always says they want to start a podcast. So maybe there's 2 questions here. I'll just turn into one. But what advice or tips would you give to people who are starting podcasts or like thinking about all the things that go into it and feel overwhelmed because of how much work it seems like it is?
Yeah, that's good. First of all, I've thought about doing a course on this. I was like, maybe I'll just do a course and offer it like at a low charge and then maybe offer consulting or something. I don't know. But I think I'd say don't overthink it. Just go talk to people, start with the relationships you have. And there are so many tools at your disposal that will help you. I mean, we use Simplecast. It streams to Apple, Spotify, Google. I mean, it does all of that for us, right? It doesn't take a lot. There's not a huge investment. Just get a good mic. I think audio is important, good audio. And just go, and you'll just get better as you go along, and you'll learn as you go along. So I think that would be my advice. Yeah, maybe have some what is your goal? Think about what your goal is for the podcast. Is it, for a brand awareness, or is it to build relationships? Because that's partly our goal too, So getting clear on that is important. Yeah.
Yes, just doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Don't
glad we
overthink
didn't
it.
overthink it. Overthinking kills so many interesting initiatives. Like, and also it's like action produces learnings. It's like you can't
Totally.
learn anything until you've like put something out into the world.
Yeah. When you guys were like, you help us with this podcast, I was like, I've never done this. What if I fail? And it's like, we're doing fine. Just interesting how we think things are scary at first, but action helps that.
Yeah. And I just realized I didn't flip that other question back on you. Like, what was the most surprising for you throughout this whole process?
How valuable and how many avenues and opportunities the podcast can help present. I mean, nurturing relationships, potentially turning those into clients, or just having great connections. I think that has been the most surprising. I think there's so much value in these relationships that you guys have built, and you spend an hour with them, and it's been great to listen to those. And I've learned a lot along the way from each of them in so many different areas. So yeah, I just think it's a great relationship builder. That has been the biggest takeaway for me.
You should start a podcast on creating podcasts.
Yeah. Want to be my guests?
I'll do it.
We'll be on.
I don't know if there's enough to talk about. I don't know.
I feel like it's a whole new field, and I think it's actually going to be a huge component of like a lot of B2B content strategies moving forward.
Possibly, yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people know the playbook nor the operations to make it a success.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah. I also think a lot of people get stuck about the process before even recording anything. Like they might be like, oh, I gotta have a perfect process for recording and the perfect equipment, and I need to have the right software. And then when I record it, then I need to turn it into a blog and all these things. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's a lot of work. I'm not going to do this. So
people do that with fucking everything.
Yeah.
It's like, like
I used to do that.
Yeah. I'm part of this like little, like a Discord community, and like somebody gave advice, like, I don't know, it was like take a certain supplement, or no, it was like it was like a meditation or something like that. And they're like, should I do this like before bed or like in the morning before breakfast and this and that? And the guy's like, don't over engineer it, just do it, like, and see if it works for you. Like, I don't know what it is. It's like fear or something like that causing people to.
There's too much advice in the world. I'll just say
yeah.
Yeah.
Just do the thing.
So then, Karissa, you mentioned potentially starting a course on how to do a podcast. I don't know if that's how concrete that idea is, but what's next for you?
Well,
if you can share.
Yeah. So I basically am going to freelance more. I love the freelance world because I can work per project. I can be choosy about who I'm working with. I can kind of control. I'm a mom now, so this is just a phase in my life where sometimes I may feel more overwhelmed because of everything going on behind the scenes, and I just need to step back a little bit. And I like that I can kind of control the amount of work coming in versus being full-time in-house. That's just how I'm feeling right now in this phase of my life. So I'm going to freelance, and I kind of want to pursue some more ventures of my own. I do have a couple clients I produced client success stories for. So not just the written, but also the video. So I'll interview their clients and then produce testimonials essentially. But rather than a flat testimonial, I go after the story. So what were the challenges, the solution, results. So it's just more dynamic. So that, and then, I think that's where I'm going. We'll see what comes of it.
Cool. If someone wanted your help with testimonials and those sort of projects, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can email me. We can put it in the description, but it's just my first and last name at Gmail. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me there. Yeah, appreciate that.
We'll put it all in the show notes.
Yes.
Oh, it's kind of weird. It's all flipped now.
Alex, put it in the show notes.
We'll figure out how to make show notes, I guess. And we'll put it in the show notes.
What are we going to do with that? We're going to be like, what's Simplecast?
Where's the show notes?
What's my WordPress login?